Samantha Chakravalesu Atra Gachantu Devata Sadhamang Munirajasa Sunantu Sadhamokadang Dhamma Savana Kalo Ayang Badanta Dhamma Savana Kalo Ayang Badanta Dhamma Savana Kalo Ayang Badanta Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Devotees, the topic of this Dhamma talk is, what is the mind? To understand the Buddha's teachings, it is essential that we understand what he taught us about the mind. The whole foundation of the teachings of the Buddha we can consider a problem and its solution. This problem is what the Buddha called dukkha. Whether we are a man or a woman, whether we are rich or we are poor, whether we're living in Sri Lanka or overseas, whether we're the Queen or the President, every single human being is having this problem called dukkha. In English, we can translate this word as something like suffering, pain, unhappiness, or even in the modern day, we can use a word like stress. This seems to be the affliction of most modern people. Stress, unhappiness, depression, a lack of mental ease, mental health. It is to this problem that the Buddha offered this world a solution, a way for once and for all to finish or overcome suffering and unhappiness, to free our mind from what he called dukkha. Now, to understand this, how we can free our mind from unhappiness and stress and suffering, we need to understand what the Buddha taught us about how the mind works. Especially we need to understand three key words that the Buddha used when talking about the mind. These are Vijnana, Mano, Chitta. Now, before I give an English translation of these words, if we take an example that will help us to understand what the Buddha meant by these words which he used to describe the mind. Now, say for example, someone comes to you in the office, say your boss, or someone more senior than you, and he screams at you in very bad language that's very upsetting, and as a result you become very angry, and inside it's like burning, and you're starting to suffer, you're starting to feel stress and unhappiness. Now, if we ask ourselves, how did this happen? How did this stress and suffering arise? Well, the first thing we can say is that firstly, you heard your boss or you saw your boss, and then through your senses you experienced what he was saying to you. You heard what he was saying, you saw him say it, maybe you experienced some smell in that occasion. It's different every time. But we can say that this episode of mental discomfort or stress started with that sense experience you had. When the Buddha talked about the senses, he used this word vijnana. So he's talked about different types of vijnana. The eyes he called chakku vijnana. The ear he called sota vijnana. The tongue he called dyuha vijnana. The nose he called gana vijnana. And the whole body he called kaya vijnana. So he spoke about these 5 different types of vijnana. So a common English word we can use to describe what this vijnana is perception. We perceive through the eye, we perceive through the nose, the tongue, the ears, and through the whole body we experience perception. So although the common translation of vijnana into English is consciousness, I think a more simple way of describing what this vijnana is, what the Buddha is referring to when he uses the word vijnana, is these sense perceptions. So if you think of this example I gave, or any other example of suffering or stress or unhappiness in your life, you'll notice that it begins with an experience through our sense doors. That is, we see something, we hear something, we touch something, we taste something, or perhaps we have a memory of doing so in the past, or an imagination of doing so in the future. So here, in this example, we have heard the boss through our ears, we have seen the boss through our eyes, and perhaps we've also smelt the boss through our nose. So we've experienced some sense data. Now, in modern science, we know that all the senses are connected to the brain through something like telephone wires, which are nerves really, we call nerves in the scientific language. So from the ear, a nerve goes to the brain, from the eyes, a nerve travels to the brain, from the nose, a nerve travels to the brain, from the tongue, a nerve travels to the brain, and from your whole body, nerves are traveling to the brain. So whatever data we experience from our senses, through the nerves, this is all carried to the brain, where the information is gathered from the 5 senses, collected, and the brain starts to give meaning to what is experienced through the senses. For example, in this situation, we might give meaning like, my boss is yelling at me. Why is he doing this? I am always so hardworking, I'm doing everything he says, he's never grateful. This is so unfair. So maybe we start to create a story like this in the mind to make meaning of what we experienced through our senses. Now this making of meaning or interpretation of the information that's collected through our senses is what the Buddha called mano. So an English word we can use to translate the Pali word mano is cognition, or even perhaps conceptualization. Whatever is perceived through the senses is all collected and cognized by the brain, or conceptualized by the brain. Now we can understand 2 of the words that the Buddha used to describe the mind. Vijnana, which refers to sense perception, and mano, which refers to the cognition of what is perceived through the senses by our brain. Now, this is not the end of the mental process, and it is not at this point yet we haven't begun to suffer or feel stress. But according to the stories that we create in the mind, however we conceptualize our sense data, according to that, the brain sends signals to some hormone glands in the body, and hormones start to be released into the blood, which is then carried around our whole body, and it creates changes in our body. For example, maybe our heart begins to beat faster. Maybe our muscles become tense. Maybe we start to sweat. Our blood pressure rises. Maybe our jaw muscles become tight. These various changes start to take place in the body. Now, this is what the Buddha referred to, this change in the whole body, as chitta. In English, we can use the word emotion. An emotion starts to be created in our body and our mind. This is what the Buddha referred to as chitta, the emotional process. So first we started from perception, then that became cognition, and from cognition now an emotion has arisen in the body and the mind. It is really this emotional arousal in the body and the mind that leads to suffering, because emotional arousal is a whole series of changes within the whole body and the whole mind, which creates much discomfort within us. This discomfort which accompanies our emotional arousal is what the Buddha called dukkha, or what in modern language we call stress, suffering, unhappiness. Emotion is a whole change in our whole body and mind which accompanies much tension and discomfort. And it is this tension and discomfort that the Buddha called dukkha, or what we can call stress. So once emotion has arisen in us and we are experiencing stress or tension, discomfort, what is the natural reaction to that? The natural reaction is to try to release that tension within us, the discomfort within us. And the only way we can release that is through our speech or actions. But in this context, if you're in the office, you cannot go to scream at your boss or say something back to your boss. You cannot go to hit your boss or slam the door or do something like that, which is what the natural way would be of releasing this tension. Maybe when you're at home with your partner or your children, you can release tension this way. But in the office, that would create many problems as an employee. So what's the other alternative to releasing the tension is to suppress the tension within us, to push it down so it doesn't come out in our speech or actions. Now, these two ways of dealing with tension or suffering or dukkha the Buddha called them two extremes that normal people tend towards in dealing with stress. One is to express our tension in speech or action, and one, if we cannot do that, is to suppress or repress the tension inside of us. And the Buddha saw both of these as unhealthy ways to deal with stress. One, because if we go to release the tension in action or speech, maybe we speak badly or we act badly, and many problems can arise as a result. Or if we go to suppress the tension all the time or repress the tension all the time, this can lead to many negative effects within us ultimately it can lead to both physical and mental health problems. So these two ways that we normally deal with stress are both seen in the Buddhist way of thinking as unhealthy. So what is the alternative? What is the Buddha suggesting? Well, the Buddha is ultimately suggesting that the real way to deal with this rising of tension or stress within us is to free our mind of these emotional arousals, what we call the arousal of the chitta aspect of our mind. To learn how to keep the chitta or our emotions calm, serene, peaceful, so that no matter what happens in the outside world, no matter what we are perceiving through our senses, we are able to keep our emotions calm, still, and peaceful. So this is the idea behind Buddhism, learning how to gain control of our emotions so that ultimately we are free completely of these emotions altogether. So this is what the Buddhist practice is, and the method of learning how to gain control of our emotions, how to free the mind of emotions, is what we call the Noble Eightfold Path, or in Pali, the Arya Ashtangika Marga, which is a process containing 8 steps. And it is through the development of these 8 steps that we will be able to gain complete control over our emotions and become calm, happy, peaceful people. So these 8 steps, they cannot all be developed at once, but it's a slow process. But by learning to practice these 8 steps that the Buddha showed us, which a part of is developing our behavior, learning to meditate, learning to calm the mind, slowly but surely we are able to gain control over our emotions, so that no matter what happens in this external world, which we cannot control, so many things are happening that what we must see, we must hear, we must observe. But no matter what it is, we can keep the mind calm, peaceful, and serene. So this is the idea of the Buddha's teachings, and to really understand this, what the Buddha is saying, it's very important we understand what he has taught us about the mind. And to do this, we must learn these 3 words: Vijnana, Mano, Chitta, which refers to 3 different aspects of the mind, but we can also think of them as a chain reaction in our mind and body. That a chain reaction which is triggered by stimulation in the outside world, which is perceived in the senses. What's perceived in the senses, that information is carried to the brain, and processed in the brain, given meaning to by the brain. And according to how the brain gives meaning to what we perceive, emotions start to be aroused in us. And then we start to act according to these emotions, which can lead to harm both ourselves and other people. So the key to understanding how to gain control of our emotions is what I said before, to understand that emotions are aroused according to how we interpret our situation. Now, if your boss yells at you and you interpret that situation as, this is so unfair, why is he doing this to me? Such thinking like that. I've done so much. What have I done to deserve this? If we start to think in this way, then we start to get unhappy or angry. But if we can think about it or interpret what our boss is saying to us in another way, we can learn to keep our emotions calm. We can learn to stop anger arising, stop fear arising, stop sadness arising. If we can just listen to the boss and say, well, maybe he's had a bad day today, or maybe I've done something and he's misunderstood, maybe this is a misunderstanding. If we can think calm, rational thoughts when we are faced with difficult situations like this, then you'll find that our emotions are not aroused. The emotions remain calm. Emotions are only aroused if we start to think in a way that arouses the emotions. And this is what the Buddha means in that famous verse when he says, Mano pubbang gama dhamma, mano setta mano mea. What does that mean? It means that the mano part of our mind, which we called cognition or conceptualization, is what determines our experience, what precedes our experience. If you think in a positive way, then your experience will be positive. But if you think in a negative way, then the emotional chitta will be aroused and you start to experience negativity within. You start to experience stress, suffering, sorrow, unhappiness, and discomfort. So another way of thinking about the Buddhist path is learning to use our rational cognitive faculty or the conceptual faculty to gain control of our emotional aspect of our mind. The rational mind and the emotional mind are always in conflict within one another, within us. It's really like a bit like the mother and the little child. We also have the mother and the little child within us. The mother is the mano aspect of our mind, or the rational aspect of our mind, the cognitive aspect of our mind. And the chitta, the emotional aspect, is like the little child who wants to misbehave all the time. So always there is a tension, a dueling within these two faculties of the mind. So the whole of the Buddhist path can be seen as an effort to develop our mano or rational mental faculty to become stronger and ultimately gain complete control over our chitta or emotional faculty. So time's running out, but to recapitulate what I just explained today, the main message of the Dhamma talk is understanding these three words that the Buddha has used to describe the mind, and understanding how they work to create stress or dukkha or tension within us. From vijnana to mano to chitta, and when the chitta is aroused, we experience dukkha. In English, from sense perception to conception or cognition to emotional arousal, which creates stress and suffering, and which then leads us to either express that emotion or suppress that emotion, which are both unhealthy, harmful ways of us dealing with our emotional experiences. Instead, if we can use the Buddha's teaching, meditation, to learn to calm our emotions, to calm our mind, to think rationally, then all of us have the ability to become free of these negative emotions and ultimately become peaceful, happy, content individuals, and ultimately one day achieve the supreme goal of all Buddhists, which is nirvana or enlightenment. So for those of you listening, all your family members, as well as all the monks and staff who've come together and worked hard to create this Dhamma talk today. We wish you all good health, happiness, peace, and solely by developing this Noble Eightfold Path, we all hope one day that you all can achieve this supreme peace of mind which Buddhists call Nibbana. So to end today's Dhamma talk, I'll do a short chanting to wish you all good health, happiness and peace. Sabbhitiyo vivajjantu, sabbharogo vinasatu, Mate bhavat vantarayo, sukhi digayuko bhava, bhavatu sabbha mangalang, rakkantu sabbha devata, sabbha buddhanubhavena, sadha sotti bhavantu te, bhavatu sabbha mangalang, rakkantu sabbha devata, sabbha dhammanubhavena, sadha sotti bhavantu te, bhavatu sabbha mangalang, rakkantu sabbha devata, sabbha sanghanubhavena, sadha sotti bhavantu te. Abhivadana silissa niccang vaddhapachayino, Chattaro dhamma vaddhanti ayuvanno sukhang balang, ayu arogya sampatti saggha sampatti mevacha, atho nibbana sampatti iminate samijjatu.